We start with Land of Confusion. Well, we wanted, obviously the previous tour we started with Mama, and we were very aware when we did the open air shows, that particularly when it was daylight, that it wasn't really a very good song to start with. So we thought we'd start with an up song, and just going through the songs, apart from one or two of the older songs, like Behind the Lines and stuff, Land of Confusion seemed an obvious choice. It's a simple song to play, easy to get the mix right, you know, and it sounds good quite easily. Well, it was started off, you know, when we're writing songs, often I just start sampling whatever noise happens to be made in the room. And in this particular case, Mike was playing guitar. And I sampled about 20 seconds of stuff, and then I cut a little snippet out of it, which went like this. I can't hear that. So the little bit, yes, the little bit that Mike, of what Mike was playing was something like, I think it was this. Which is just sort of, he was just playing random guitar. He doesn't call it random guitar, he says it was very fine guitar playing, but I say it was random guitar. Anyhow, I just one time I put it on the keyboard and forgot about it, and then came back to it one time, and with that, and just happened to play it with this chord. Like that, and it had instant character, and I think, again, just that little phrase, just those two chords on it, and then, you know, we knew we were onto something, and the rest of the song kind of went from there, really. Well, the metronome actually was something that came really at the recording stage. It was not originally part of the song at all. It was just we needed a tempo thing to happen there, and one time Phil just did these two drumsticks, and it sounded great and gave, again, part of the atmosphere, you know. Well, it's just a matter of luck. You're going along and you try it. I mean, I've always quite enjoyed that. I think, you know, one of my roles in the early days was sometimes when we used to do songs that used to go all over the place, was to try and join bit A to join to bit B when they had to join for other reasons, and to find a chord or a couple of chords that did it, you know. And it's a bit like that, I suppose, really. I think in the case of, you know, a lot of it's decided by keys. Most of the songs we try and do in the original key. A couple of ones in the medley. I mean, Follow You, Follow Me is done in A as opposed to in G, but, you know, most of the more complicated things tend to be done in the original keys, and finding the way across is just finding a nice chord key change to make it work, you know. I don't think so, really. I mean, you know, once you start looking at the repertoire, the 100 songs that each of us might quite like to play, you know, old songs that one person likes more than another. What you have here is perhaps songs that the audience likes as much as anything else, which is really what the medley is about. It's more for the audience. You know, if we were given a totally free hand, I think we'd sit down there and just play the whole of the last album and a bit of the one before. That's not because we don't like the stuff before, but that's because that's where our hearts are at the moment, you know. And so we try when we're making a set to get away with playing as much new stuff as we can.
Who started that?
Well,
process?
it was really just one of those ones where Phil was playing, you know, really fast on the drums, and I just started playing chord sequence on top of it, really. It didn't start with the bit here at the front, that came later. We had the bit which became the verse and the chorus, just a nice chord sequence, and then also the other thing about it was it fitted. I started playing this reggae rhythm on top of what he was doing, and, you know, because it was in the same sort of tempo, and he then switched to playing reggae underneath it, so we got the middle eight part, which then also the intro developed out of the middle eight, and you know, I think it's works pretty well. Well, lyrically, again, it's one of my songs, but not, I mean, you know, very much, the second half of that was a real experiment as a sort of a way of band writing. We just improvised. Phil had this sort of drum rhythm, you know, boom, 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 like that, and Mike and I just play. We did about we got 2 or 3 hours worth of jamming on tape. And a lot of it was sounding quite good, but we couldn't sort of tie it down, so we actually listened to it, selected good moments of the jam, and then Mike and I relearned exactly what we played, even to the extent of counting, you know, so that often the beats fall on a weird beat in the bar and stuff like that, because we were just fooling around. And I think it produced a great result. I mean, it's one of my favourites of all our instrumental passages we've ever done, I think. And also when, you know, the lyrical idea, which was sort of, it was a fun thing. I had this idea of this burglar going into this house and suddenly finding out it was haunted, which I thought was quite funny, and then sort of took that idea a bit further and sort of, you know, made it one of those kind of songs looking back over people's lives, and as people kind of trapped in the past, but there's nothing they can do about it.
What did you?
Not really. It was the phrase "home by the sea" itself was something that Phil improvised at some point, and I just thought conjured up to me a sort of a haunted house, you know, on top of a cliff somewhere, you know, and so that I went from there, much like the one you see on the screen.
Insult you
Insulted me, yes. As I said, I think, you know, I can understand why people say that, but I mean, in a way, I resent it slightly just because, you know, it's very much my chord sequence that. But there are the reason why it sounds like Phil a bit, I think, is because there's certain kind of chords that I went to for that because, you know, there's certain kind of chords that his voice sounds good over. I mean, I know that. I mean, you can't stop yourself doing it. And sort of put them together in a particular kind of way that I think was quite attractive. And, you know, I think the beginning of it, which is a kind of almost like a discord, the opening chords, is one of my favourite little bits on the album. And, you know, I can demonstrate that chord here. Hang on. Because it's... yeah, you got the... really just playing what is a fairly sort of respectable chord, if you like, but just putting the wrong bass note to it. It reminded a little bit of Burt Bacharach, and so we actually ended up calling the song Burt, you know, as a working title to somebody to go with. I mean, I always liked Burt Bacharach. I thought he was one of the best writers, you know, from the 60s and 50s and 60s and stuff. But, you know, I like that, and the way it develops, and you're desperate for it to resolve, you know, and it finally does. It's just, you know, and immediately you've got a song, you know. Yes. As long as you're going back to the writing stage, it's a long time since we wrote it. I can't remember everything that happened on it. All I know is that Mike had this, just played a guitar riff, and as I think I've probably said before, that if Mike's fairly static on a sort of quite a simple little riff, then it gives me a chance to play any chord I like, and I like that. You know, it gives me a and I just sort of played every chord that would fit over that riff, I think, and put them in a certain kind of order, and you get a certain kind of result. And the second half, which is, you know, the two halves were not the same song originally. The second half developed out of a jam, which we called Hawkwind, because it reminded us of an English group who used to do a lot of kind of sort of psychedelic jams, you know, which is a bit like that. It was just keeping a sort of thing going in the bass, which was this. No, not that at all. Something more like this. Going all the way through it, and then just making funny noises on the top. So you got that. Excuse to use certainly those kind of almost Hammer horror film chord sequences, you know, that I always like very much. You know, it's sort of not so much dramatic as melodramatic, but combined with the screens, you know, with all that, the lights. I mean, it always struck me ever since we wrote that. I always had this great sort of idea of this churning forward motion, and so when we got this screens thing, the idea of ripping something off from the 2001, the end of 2001 thing, you know, just I thought somehow in a situation like this with music going at an open-air concert and everything, that people would never have sort of seen anything that combination before, and it would be very, very exciting, you know, to stick Phil up in the middle there, and it's even better. I don't know, just sort of because it went down to this very serene little bit, which we ended in the glow of the night with, you know, this little quiet, wistful bit, and to come with this really sort of like aggressive bit, you know, it's like sort of the demons are suddenly in there. We always like putting, you know, I think right from the word go, Genesis, we've always quite liked putting soft bits next to loud bits and all the rest of it, because it makes each one sound, louder bits sound louder against a soft bit. I mean, it's a simple technique, but it seems to work quite well. And obviously, lyrically, the trick then is to try and make a lyric that makes it hang together. But in fact, when I wrote the lyric to that, I did sort of use the contrast, so that the first half of the song is very personal, done from an individual's point of view of how he might be affected by what one person has set in motion without realizing what he was doing, a sort of war situation I was thinking of. Where a guy's kind of lost his woman and his attitude, if you like, and saying, "Do you see what you've done?" He was really talking about whoever set pressed the original button or whatever that made the whole thing happen. The second half is a different approach, is a more surreal look at the idea, sort of nightmarish quality about it. Also. Of the domino itself, you know, the idea is there's nothing you can do when you're the next in line. I just thought it was a nice line. It sounds good when it's sung, and it's also got, I think it's a good image. Well, it wasn't. It was in most respects. What happened was that Mike had this kind of riff, the sort of basic kernel riff, if you like, which the thing's based on, which he played, and we sort of worked it into a kind of 16-bar riff. And then we started doing it heavy, which is what it immediately demanded. So Phil was playing heavy drums, and I was sort of like adding kind of big sounds and chords on it and things. And it was one of those bits you felt was just going to go nowhere. It sounded fun, but it wasn't really special, you know. And then just one time when Mike was playing it, and Phil was happened to be at the microphone, so he wasn't playing drums. And I started playing the drums on this thing. Can you find it? Is this coming out the monitors? Probably won't do. Hang on, I can do this. So you got the. And by playing that to it, it gave it a completely different feel. And all these little sounds that are on there as well. These are, and you know, it just suddenly took on a totally different feel, and it became much more kind of, it had an edge of humour in it. And Phil started, because he was on the microphone, started singing in this kind of like that, and instant character, and we just felt that's really good. And we knew if we worked on it, we would ruin it, because we'd start putting subtle stuff in it. So we didn't even work it, we didn't even give it a middle eight or anything. And when we actually put the song down, we thought, well, we've got to put a couple more chords in this, you know. So we put the perfect body bit in, just sort of some chords that seem to fit and give a bit of character to it, and left it really simple, so that we actually put it down in a sort of few hours. And I think it shows us a certain kind of direction we could go in, you know, not for everything, obviously, but just for certain songs where you totally opposite to what Genesis perhaps used to do in the past, which is kind of overblow a thing, you know, take one idea and make it massive. This is just taking an idea and just leaving it really small and making it work. I don't know really. I thought it was probably a single, but I didn't really think any of us quite had the courage to put it out as a single. We thought everyone will say, "Ooh, what have they done?" You know. And maybe as a first single, it might have seemed a bit strange. You know, you go away for 5 years and then you come out with that. People say, "Well, it's not quite what we want." So we went safer and released "No Son of Mine" as the first single, and I think that was probably the right approach. It's difficult to know. I mean, still think the best single on the album is "Tell Me Why," which we've never released, and you know, apart from maybe Europe, never looks likely to get released. Monkey Zulu, actually, yes. Well, the first part was called Monkey and the second part was called Zulu. I think it was just because Phil, when we were just improvising words on it, he was just going, yeah, la, 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 monkey, you know. So that sort of stuck, I think. And the second part, I don't know why it was called Zulu. I think it was the drum rhythm just sort of had a feel like that. You know? Yes, it originally developed out of the same jam as Domino, but we realised it was such a good little thing in itself that we decided to extract it and make something of it on its own, and just wrote what I suppose is, you know, for us is a fairly straightforward kind of sort of, you know, rock song. I think it works really well because it's just a sort of, you know, it's a very concise thing. I never think I'm going to like it, and then when I hear it, I like it. You know what I mean? In my brain, intellectually, I'm not too sure about it, but it actually works. I don't know why it developed into that, really. It was a popular live song when we first did it. Yeah, it's a great guitar riff, I think. It was a song that actually was one of those ones which is the other way that we used to write songs a bit, group songs, if you like. It was really a bit of Mike's and a bit of mine, both of which bits actually were left over from our first solo albums, in fact, funnily enough. And we just put the two together and made a song out of it. And originally it was almost just a little link bit. We had this side two of Duke, which was a lot of bits stuck together. And originally it was just going to be part of that. But I remember when we heard it, we thought it sounded so good, we made a song out of it at the time. So it became something, you know, in the studio. I think we just doubled it, you know, at the time. Thought we'll go run it twice and see what happens. Yeah, it's actually, musically, it's quite a complicated piece. For a start, it's in a funny time signature. It's in 13 or something, 13 beats, 13/8, 13/4, I suppose. Not that you really should notice that. I mean, it's just, it seemed more natural to do that than it was to make it 12, which would have been the more normal, you know. And obviously chord-wise, it goes through loads of notes of chords, that song. I mean, you know, it's a very unlikely single in a way, but the reason I think it works is because it sounds simple, even though it isn't, you know. And I've always quite liked that. You know, there are a lot of people who are good at doing that. Just like the Beach Boys, they're always good at doing things that sounded deceptively simple, but when you actually looked at them, they're really quite complicated.
I think because I was brought up when I was in the land of the protest song and the folk singer, I've kind of always avoided writing anything that was along those lines. I think maybe as you get older, you feel you're more able to say what you think and comment about the world. I've always been slightly cautious of that, actually. I know a lot of people around me preach and feel that their job is to say what they think. I remember actually I wrote that lyric and I wasn't sure it was any good at all. And I was in bed for about 2 days, it was rotten cold. And it was the last vocal to go down, I think, on that album. And Phil came over to my house and sort of sat by the bed and wrote it down, and I was sort of on my last legs, you know, and he went away and I thought, this could be all rubbish, I just don't know. And I went in about 2 days later and he sung it, and it sounded great, and he said away it was going to work well. It's a good up moment. I think you want to start the show with something that's simple, with energy, and very positive sort of song. Yeah, I think because at the start of the set, we want to hold back. This is always the old problem with all this all the screens and stuff here. You've got 2.5 hours to go, and if you peak too early, you've got nowhere to go. So it's often quite hard to hold back, but you've got to. Yeah. Well, now that my puppet is now Jesus, you probably missed that actually. Did you know that? Spitting Image was a big hoo-ha in the papers recently. They used their first puppet of Jesus, and it was a big outrage. And the guy was one of the Spitting Image guys was on the telly, and his whole point was they didn't create a special puppet for Jesus. They used an existing one, and they used my one with long hair and robes. And the guy on the radio said, "Yeah, but in the sketch you depict Jesus as a long-haired musician layabout." And the guy went, "Well, yeah, that's Mike Rutherford." So I took it in the best possible taste. It started off really, at the beginning of No Son of Mine, there is this sort of, we call it elephant noise, which is why the working title was Elephant. And Tony sampled a sound of me on the guitar, sort of bending 2 notes like that, and he slowed it down and linked it up and made this sort of elephant noise, which we put onto the back of a sort of drum machine track. I started chundering, you know, just at the start, very still like that. And he made the elephant noises, and then Phil started warbling, so to speak. And that's how songs very often start with us. And then the chorus, I remember, No Son of Mine, Phil was singing something that sounded to me like You're No Son of Mine. And I said that to him, and he said, to him the words were nothing, just it sounded like that. And I said, well, it's a nice sounding phrase, you know. And I think from that they then became No Son of Mine, as opposed to No Man of Mine, which they were for the first few days. And that's how songs often happen to us, you know. A vocal sounding line becomes the real lyric. Yeah, I mean, clocks, I know. Clocks on stage and visuals are a bit ham, but it does work quite well. We had initially, as often happens on tour, we put together a whole lot of visuals, and we've got a few that we couldn't find a place for. And No Son of Mine used to have these fractals, which are like kind of psychedelic kaleidoscopes. You just keep going and going. And it looks wonderful, but then we watched it back and thought, on the screens, and thought, A, it's a bit old-fashioned, and B, there was no justification for it. It often happens that way. You've got a very strong visual effect that you'd like to use, but if you can't find a home where it really fits, then you often end up not using it. I think the old medley is always a bit of a gamble. For some reason, this one we're doing this year is better than we've done for a long time. I'm not even quite sure why. It's just, I suppose, the choice of songs. It's a difficult thing to know quite which ones to do. We don't always agree, but certain songs like The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, it's interesting, that song was written in '74, yet to me sounds as contemporary as anything I hear around, which is quite interesting. The other stuff, the Further Fifth's guitar solo where Darryl really goes to town, it's nice to give him the chance to really stretch out and show his ability, which I think he does great on this tour. I often think medleys, how they work is a bit of luck. I think it's so easy. I mean, the lyrical content of that song about the TV evangelists, it's a perfect platform to have a lot of fun. You know, some songs, No Son of Mine as an example, you can't really do too much visually on it without being a bit corny. Jesus, once again, with the humour in it, is a great chance to mess around and have the little TV frame where Phil's mounted in. And we like the idea of trying to have a different environment for each song, and framing the screens, a la TV screen, was good. And there are a million more ideas we didn't have time to use. It's one of those songs you can really go to town on. I've gone a bit off Home by the Sea this tour. I've got a feeling Home by the Sea, this is how we work on choosing the set. Towards the end of the tour, you sense that songs are due for retirement, to go into the happy holiday home in the sky. I've got a feeling Home by the Sea, which is one of my favourite songs, has been for a long time, it's just starting to pale on me a bit. In fact, the other day in the car, my son, who loves the live album, little 5-year-old, plays it all the bloody time, it's driving me crazy. And I actually fast-forwarded Home by the Sea and got to the drum solo by mistake and realised I was actually enjoying the drum solo more than Home by the Sea. I think that tells you quite enough. No, I don't mind that. That's always become sort of part of our sort of vaudeville routine. Phil was worrying the other night that he's doing the same old thing, and I said, well, who knows what the future brings, but I'm sure you won't do the same introduction again. But it's almost, the domino thing, it's almost a bit of a sort of routine with the audience, the fact they know it now. Yeah, I mean, I think if my memory holds me correct, and Tony always remembers better than I, Phil was away for a day, I think, doing something, and so Tony and I messed around, and I had this guitar riff, which was called Heavy A Flat, I think, which I was going to do in a rather traditional Genesis way. And I'll show you, he started playing just the drum machine, boom, sh, ba, boom, and I started just going, and it sort of became a bit swamp rock. And the thing about the riff I always find is that, I mean, what I play is always pretty simple on the guitar. And it sounds a very simple riff, but actually it's when you come to try and play it, for example, Daryl, who can learn anything, he couldn't work it out until I showed him. I felt quite pleased over that. It's, it's very simple, but until you see the fingers going, it's hard to work out. And somehow the drum machine pattern suddenly made it unlike a Genesis thing, and we headed off into a sort of Polk Style and Annie Blue Jeans commercial area. And we never actually wrote the song. We just had a riff, a drum machine. We went in one day, and I said to Tony, or we said, give us some chords for the middle eight. So he went bang, 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 and we put it down. And it sounded great straight away. And I could see us working more in that way in the future, where you don't actually write some songs, you just give them a crack. And they either take off or they die. And if they die, you don't force them to sort of come to life. And a lot of people on that song said it's so unlike Genesis. But I've always felt that we're songwriters, and we could do any kind of song. And as long as we feel comfortable with it, we'll do it. Monkey Zulu. Part 1 was Monkey, and part 2 was Zulu. Quite why, I don't know, but that's how working titles go. I think part 1 was always better than part 2. Part 2, which we don't play on stage now, was good, but I think over the years, Genesis has done a lot of instrumentals, and I think they're all pretty good, but some are a little bit more special. And I think the second part of Tonight is good, but not one of our best. They do, because they're just about, it's seedy nightlife, it's meant to be. It's kind of New England Soho or dodgy parts of New York or LA. It's kind of, it's meant to put you in that setting. where you go and you score drugs and all that all happens. Yeah, I heard him say that in an interview, and I hadn't actually. I see what he means. I hadn't seen that because it's very sort of stripped down. One of the interesting things about Invisible Touch for me was that I try and put the bass down in the studio at the same time the drums go down. And Invisible Touch was one of those songs where the bass part, which I played at the same time as Phil put the drums down, took the drums in a certain way. Some of the patterns came from the bass. And unfortunately on the new album, I had to go away and do quite a bit of Mike and the Mechanics promotion, something I try and avoid, the two overlapping. And I wasn't around with some of the drums going down, which I think is actually, it's a shame because you might miss out on some moments where the bass and drums lock in. It was a funny time because Peter left and we started writing, and Steve Hackett was finishing up his solo album for the first 3 days. So it was just me, Phil and Tony in there. And we went in thinking, well, we'll give it a crack, writing and see what happens. And I think Volcano was the first thing, and Squonk and a few other bits. But they just, the first 3 days, the songs or the bits just came out so easily. It's a complicated chord. That's actually, the chord sequence isn't that hard, it's the rhythm that's hard. It's a song, Guitar Riff I wrote in a funny tune, so I can't show it to you. And I wrote it, and I thought it was in straight 4/4. And Phil suddenly said, hey, do you realise that this riff's in 13? And I went, no. And I think the trick of something that's sort of quite a clever time signature is that it should appear not clever, which I feel in the old days, Genesis would do a lot of stuff we were trying to impress ourselves and everyone else with how clever we were. Whereas now I feel some of those bits which we wrote then we wouldn't be happy with now. No, it used to be in the set, and the knife used to be the encore. I'm always rather pleased. That's one of the older songs we do. I'm always pleased, and I feel we get no credit for it. The fact that we actually, over the years, Genesis has managed to drop the old classic favourite songs in a set, and within about 6-7 years, what with the old standards have been dropped, the new ones have come in. Whereas I kind of feel a lot of other bands who've been going as long as we have to remain much more on playing the old faves. Well, I understand the comment in a way because it's the kind of song Phil does very well on his solo albums, the ballad with the 808 sort of drum machine sounds and a warm chord sound, which is a bit of his trademark. But beyond that, I think as Tony said, the kind of chords he used are actually really quite complicated chords. And Phil and I don't know any complicated chords. So therein lies the big difference, I think. The first part, I never really say whose is whose. The first part, it starts with me going and an example of how we work, I play that for the first 4 minutes. That's all I play. And with his chords, it makes some very weird clashes. You're almost too weird, but it makes for an original sound because I'm playing some very strange notes in his chords. The second half came out of a jam, really, is the way I look upon it. And the first part of the second half, the driving bit, he plays these what I call very sort of Hammer horror film chords, which set a very dark mood, which go on the screen go on the show when Phil's doing the bit on the screen. And then at the end, it kind of goes into what I call a guitar riff. It's the no, it's not. See, what I do when I play guitar, I have the top string tuned down to D all the time. And when friends borrow my guitar, they turn it back to normal. So when I pick it up, this bit. there's sort of heavy chords. Over which the drums just sort of rumble along. I often think that what I provide in Genesis is sort of quite basic, a bit Keith Richardsy, believe it or not as bluesy type chord parts. Very simple sort of chunky guitar, which I often think counters what Tony's sort of fiddly bits. In the best possible taste, the fiddly bits can be taken.
He wrote the lyrics. Yeah. Yeah, I just started out as, I can't remember now, it's about 6-7 years ago. But I think it just started out as a chord sequence which didn't have any melody on it for a while. And Mike wrote the sort of politically slanted lyrics on that. And what kind of, it was a song that was decided to be a single, really because we had a very strong video with it. I mean, sometimes you can have a strong video with a weak song and it can suddenly happen. But it wasn't so much a weak song, but it was actually not ever thought about as a single. And suddenly you give the record company a package and say, this is the song and this is the video. And of course they went mad with it and it won her a Grammy, which is the only video we've never been in, really. Well, we wanted to open the show, I mean, just start differently than the way we've started before. And we haven't really got that many up songs, you know, up-tempo songs. We didn't want to, we wanted to try and change the end of the show as well. And Invisible Touch was, you know, and Domino was going to be, going to occupy that area, along with I Can't Dance, which was, none of us thought would be a show closer, because it was totally untried. Very simple song, very, you know, totally untried. Usually you put your old favourites at the end. So that gamble paid off because it worked great. But Confusion, I like the idea of coming on stage with the three heads, because that definitely shows straight away that you're not taking yourselves too seriously, you know. And I think that's important with a band like us that's got a lot of history behind us, and also the image that we're all sort of studiously working out how to play different things in different time signatures and try to be as arty as possible. It just isn't true, and I think that helps put that over, you know. Well, musically, it was the same as every other song, really. I mean, it just started off with a chord sequence and a drum machine pattern, which was, even the original drum machine pattern was kind of metronomic, like a clock, which is where the tick-tock at the beginning came from. And Tony had sampled a bit of Mike's guitar playing on the emulator, and he'd slowed it down a bit, which is the elephant noise, and that sounds a bit like, that was, at the right speed, it's a guitar, and he did something to it, and also played it slower. So that was the elephant noise, and then we had that was a very strong mood, and the lyrics came about really like most of the lyrics on the album, just letting your mind wander and singing whatever comes into your head. And the phrase I was singing was "No son of mine." You're no son of, or something that sounded like that. Anyway, Mike thought that's what it was, and he said to me, "That's what you're singing, right?" And I said, "Well, it actually isn't, but that's a good idea. That's almost like what it is. Maybe that's what it should be." And then I went away and wrote the lyrics, thinking, "No son of mine." Well, what does that mean to me? I mean, that means maybe someone, a kid that's left home, and it sort of went in that direction. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I suppose that would be the first thing one would think of, but I mean, it isn't. I think as a songwriter, you just sort of try and put yourself in a situation, How would you feel if this happened to you? How would you describe it? And it's also when the song was written and released, it was just kind of, there had been a lot of press in England, at least, about abuse at home. Cleveland up north had a big thing in the papers about child abuse, sexual child abuse. But I mean, you're never quite sure in the song whether it's sexual, physical, or mental abuse. But and it could be all three. It could mean whatever it wants to mean to that particular person that's listening to it. Really. Yeah, well, that's because of where it is. That's where it is in the show, being the second song. I think we didn't really want to tie it to the video that we made for the song. and obviously an image you can use at the beginning is the time bomb, if you like, of an emotional time bomb, which is the clocks. Well, we all agreed that we wanted to do something. We have to do, a selection of old songs. I mean, we like doing a selection of old songs. We had to do something different from the Cage medley, which we've been doing for years. So we just, and some of the old things, you can't really play anymore. I mean, you can't play them differently. They're a period piece, and you don't really play like that anymore. And I like to sing about things that I know about, and some of the lyrics were more surreal and more fantasy and science fiction, which was less, well, personally it's less easy to sing, but it is part of the past, and so you go with it. But the songs we ended up choosing, we felt that were musically representative. We could play them now and they'd still sound fresh, and they kind of pinpointed different periods. I mean, Dance on a Volcano was the very first thing that we wrote without Peter. That riff, was the first thing we wrote, and When I Was Down on Broadway obviously has become now a bit of a standard or a classic Genesis song, whereas at the time it wasn't at all. I mean, everyone sort of wondered what we were doing in 1974. So certain things have sort of, they're there. Each bit is there for a reason, and we just tried to encapsulate 20 minutes a bit of our history, really. Well, musically, it was. It's very hard to be original about what happened with the music, because they all started off the same way. But lyrically, it's easy. I mean, I had this phrase, "Jesus, he knows me and he knows I'm right," which is a bit like Life of Brian, which is, you are the Messiah, I'm not the Messiah. Yes, you are. I should know I followed a few. That was kind of the basis for the idea. So I had this phrase, "Jesus, he knows me and he knows I'm right." And again, those phrases are easy to come by because you just sing and you repeat them time and time again, and eventually you're going to have to write words around it. So I came in with the lyrics. I forget really. I mean, I guess again, you sort of, "Jesus, he knows me and he knows I'm right." Now, what does that mean? Is it a song about, God forbid, I didn't want anybody to think that I was a religious fanatic, but so if you take that meaning away, then maybe it is these evangelists, and I have a real passion for sort of some of these guys. I think they're great. Ernest Angley is my favourite. He made a very big impression on me when I first came to America. I just, like all of us, we turned on the television and thought it was a comedy show at first, and then you realise it isn't. And this seemingly outrageous guy with a very dodgy wig and a very pink leisure suit stands there and tells you all these unbelievable things that Jesus did to him, sign of the cross. I mean, Tony and Mike, especially Tony, wasn't sure about the lyric. He thought it was could offend a lot of people here. He wasn't sure, although he's a cynic in the band, he wasn't sure whether the lyric would be too offensive. But we did it anyway, and it's turned out on stage, it's turned out to be such a strong song. We almost dropped it. When we were rehearsing the set, we thought, it doesn't sound so good. Tony particularly didn't think it sounded so good, and there was a couple of other songs he wanted to put in, and we just kept going with it. And of course, we only had to do it at a couple of shows, and it became it probably is one of the highlights of the show. Well, we took all the things that, I mean, I forget which evangelist it was.
Swaggart.
Jimmy Swaggart that wanted $18 million, yeah. Well, I remember reading that in the paper or hearing it on the radio when they actually did that and thinking it was a great idea. I'm going to be struck dead unless I'm going to get $18 million. So, we took all that stuff and basically, satirized the whole thing. And I mean, we've not had any feedback from any evangelists. I've had some letters from people wanting to know how I feel about God. Is this, they're very upset that I should be, singing a song that's very anti-religion, whereas in fact it isn't anti-religion. It's anti the exploiters of religion, really. But we haven't had any feedback from evangelists themselves. I'm sure someone must have shown them a video. I wonder what Ernest thinks. Home by the Sea. Well, that was a bit like Harlem Shuffle, actually. We saw that as a bit of our Harlem Shuffle, and we had the rhythm and the very, very first few chords, and I started singing just that phrase, home by the sea, and it put Tony, who was, again, it was a long song, and so Tony was going to write the lyrics to it. It put him in a direction, and he thought home by the sea, a haunted house. And I think a lot of people, with some of these songs, with the screens, they are now understanding what the song's about. I mean, Home by the Sea, a lot of people probably have never really thought about too much what it's about, unless you really study the lyrics. But it's, it's about a burglar breaking into a house, and while he's going through everything, he's unleashing, a bit like Poltergeist, he's unleashing these spirits. So it's, sort of an interesting slant on Home by the Sea, really. And the second half of it was called Second Home by the Sea, for the more affluent members. Yeah, some of the reviews said that as well. I mean, because it's got a drum machine, pad, sustained chords, and a kind of lyric that I would write. I mean, I did write the lyric, but originally it was called Hole in My Heart, and we felt it was too medical, so we changed it. Yeah, it's kind of unlike a Genesis song, really. I mean, I suppose that's probably why people thought it was one of mine, because it is so very simple. And in terms of where it comes in the show, it's a relief from the sort of the bombastic stuff. It comes after Home by the Sea in the set, and that is, quite a loud, long piece. So it's an unusual song that, we wouldn't have normally thought that it would have worked live, but it actually it serves its purpose in the show. Yeah. It's sort of pretty standard, it's the sort of man, someone having a conversation with himself, determined not to get hurt this time, because every time he wears his heart on his sleeve and every time he goes in there with all the guns firing, and he just gets the carpet pulled out from underneath him, and just trying to sort of tell himself to just hold on. Well, I mean, it's about the song is about these models that do the jeans commercials. Really, the lyric originally, I mean, with the song, I can remember very, very well that it was just Tony was playing this particular drum machine pattern like this with his fingers. Mike played this guitar riff, and I started singing "I can," and I thought, this is great, but no, we're not going to use this because this is far too simple, far too bluesy, and it's never going to get past the starting gate, And we finished, we just finished mucking about with it for 5-10 minutes, and everyone said that was great, Let's not muck about with it. Let's just leave it and record it. When we do the album, we'll just record it and see what happens to it, and not work on it, because it would have been over rehearsed and overwritten. So, literally, when we recorded it, we put it down the same way, just had a couple of extra chords to it. And while Mike and Tony were doing their parts, I was writing the words in the corner, based on these jeans things. Hot sun beating down was one of the original words anyway, original lines. And it just sort of came, and it was one of those moments, very rare moments with us, that the three of us, I mean, what do you reckon? What do you reckon about this line? Yeah, that. And then you sort of, within half an hour, we had the words. And the video we had great fun doing, sort of taking each verse, the scenario of a jeans commercial. And that's it, really. Yeah, the walk actually it was very strong. I mean, we always thought that the chorus would, the only thing about me is the way I walk. It was crying out for something like that. And the actual walk itself, when I was at stage school, doing dancing and stuff, you could always tell the kids that were never going to be able to dance because they always used the same hand and the same foot when they were doing their tap dancing or ballet dancing. And you could look at them and know that their parents are wasting their money, because if you can't do it coordinated, it's a bit like walking with the same hand, same foot. You got no chance, and so it wasn't thought about. I think I just started doing it because I remember seeing kids do it at school, at the stage school, and the three of us just walked across, and we did it a few times. Yeah, we see here.
They don't see the video, I guess.
There is no video outlet here. If you're, they won't show it on Top of the Pops unless it's a huge hit, and then as soon as you go on the program, they'll show that anyway. And really, they'll only ever see on the chart show. They'll show it, little clips of it, and that's really a shame, because even videos like Jesus, you know how much trouble we take over the videos, and they're all very well thought out. They've all got a lot of humour in them. And unfortunately, in England, people don't see that humour. In America, they know that the videos are humorous because they see them wall to wall all the time, every day, day in, day out. Here, that side of us is kind of unknown a bit. So we're lucky that the song stands up as well as it does at the end of the show, because really, it was a hit, but video-wise it wasn't. And visually, it's just, you're taking a bit of a risk by closing the show with it, That's a song about drug addiction, actually, and a lot of people wouldn't know that. They probably think it's just about tonight, But yeah, it's about a drug addiction, really. Yeah. Well, one thing led to another. I mean, when we were writing it, it had a drum machine pattern which started it, and Tony had these sampled marimba sounds, and I started singing a bit Lennon-esque, really, John Lennon, coming down like a monkey, sort of that kind of come together type thing. And monkey, of course, has always been synonymous with heroin, and so it was kind of when you rehearse, when you write the song over a period of weeks, months, some lyrics you can't get rid of, because they become part of the thing that sounds best with the music. So you have to try and write lyrics with the words that sound good. And so therefore, with something like, with Sussudio as an example, but you get like coming down like a monkey, I've got to make that make sense. Is it about a circus? You've got to sort of think of all the possibilities. So I ended up doing it about writing it about sort of the drug addiction. So, well, no, it's really, it's kind of just that sort of seedy side of life. And the video we did for Tonight was really moody. The guy was going somewhere, and it was violent, it's just that kind of Wardour Street, deals on the corner of the street, prostitutes. It's just that kind of seedy side of life, really. And we just went for the flashing neons because that kind of captured the atmosphere. But in fact, the lyric is about, someone waiting for his dealer to call him, Yeah, I like Invisible Touch very much. That's one of my, especially on stage, it sounds great on stage. It was meant to be, when we wrote the song, when Mike wrote the guitar riff, and he just played it, and I started singing She Seems to Have an Invisible Touch. The chorus kind of was there straight away. And it was written a bit like, in my mind, it was like a Sheila E. Prince thing. And nobody's ever really sussed that out. Nobody's ever seen it as an R&B song. But it really, to me, it is, And it's about the kind of women that you meet, that whether you like it or not, they suck you in and they get under your skin, and there's no way you'll ever get over it, And I married one of them. But, earlier, my first wife. Yes, you meet these people, and I'm surprised it wasn't a bigger hit in England, because it was a number one, and it was our only number one American single. But I would have thought it would have been a bigger hit in England, but it wasn't. But we've re-released it. We keep trying. Turn It On Again was a guitar riff of Mike's, which is actually in a complicated, it's in 13/8, and it's a riff that doesn't sound complicated. We wrote it at my house. We did Duke. I moved out of my bedroom into one of the other rooms, and we moved all the equipment in, and we rehearsed and wrote all the songs there. And Tony Onigan was one of the songs that we actually came back. We came back to writing together during that album, and Turn It On Again and Duchess were two of the main songs on that album, which actually had us writing, the three of us bouncing ideas, which is what we do now and what we used to do. But it was the album after, and then there were three, and then there were three was really separate songs, separate writers. So Turn It On Again was kind of a special song from that point of view, and it's been around forever. I mean, on stage it has. It's always been an encore, really, since the last few tours. And we took out the medley stuff because we felt we'd done that. Got a bit bored with that.